Hello, everybody. My name is Johan Melin, and this is the first, let's call it masterclass, but I rather want to call it the key to storytelling for films and novels and any type of story with me, Johan Melin. And let's begin directly. You sit there and you want to tell a story. I meet literally everybody and anyone these days tell me, oh yeah, I have this idea for a film, or you have some kind of seed that you want to make into a film of some sort. Then, for let's say 95% of the people, what happens is that you get lost in doing that transition of this very, very, how to say, compressed vision of or download that you make. Let's say, let's call this your initial seed to the story, and then many of you talk to me about how hard it is, or actually also many people give up on their story before it even was allowed to start. And follow me here on this account, and I will try to guide you through what makes a good story. And I don't promise anything like many other these online courses. I've been seeing this. I've been working with storytelling for just about my whole life, and I made stories that both succeeded in finding their audience, and also stories which did not. And I've been working both as a consultant on many, many films, as well as being the writer, adapting other people's stories from books or ideas, or sometimes, most of the times, for my own stories that I've been doing from scratch. And I would say today, in this day and age, the hardest thing, the kind of biggest mountain you can climb, is to make an original story. And the problem with many of these, let's say, courses, schools, and what people will say to you is that they are going to try to find the reference point in their catalog or their roster, in their minds, of how this corresponds to your story, and they will judge your story based on this. So there is also a feeling from my side that many people also feel they shoot down their story very, very early on, because their idea, they think, don't correspond to the mainstream narrative of how you tell a story. And let's say, how do you really tell a story? I mean, in a way, you have generally, for the classic story, you have 3 acts or 4 acts sometimes. Depends on, maybe sometimes even 5 acts, but that is another chapter of this storytelling talk, or this storytelling ways that I'm talking about. Because my aim is to tap into your intuitive sides, where most of us are actually pretty good storytellers. Then, in the translation to film and a novel or short story, whatever kind of story, we get lost in transition, so to speak. And this is also the same, that kind of guy or girl who is starting saying like, oh yeah, I was thinking about this story, either they recap a story or they gonna tell you a story which they have thought of. And many times you see this, that somewhere along the way it doesn't make sense. You get lost as an audience or the one who's told by a story. And you can say like the youngest form of storytelling we have is film storytelling. It's the youngest in this sense that it's only been there for 100 years, and you can see actually the film stories up until the silent movie era was kind of because what happened was that the first 30 years of filmmaking was very pioneering, because you had to make a story without sound, and to tell that story, actually what you had in those days was a new form of communication that people all over the world could see, no matter what they came from, no matter of their history, their film story references. All of a sudden you could tell a story through pictures and make it universal, so to speak. So here was the new campfire, which was cinema, right? Then came sound, and as we all know, and also the way how I think this personally, that the pioneers of filmmaking, they became pioneers because also in those days, to make a film was not seen as something posh or something grand like now, or at least up until 10 years ago, let's say. The film medium in itself was for the poor man's theater, so to speak. And it was also, it was cheap, and there was not so long line of reference. Of course, there were references in theater, there were references to music, to plays, but the early filmmakers invented a new language, right? There was an emotional language, and there was a universal language. So you can see with the first 30 years of the films that are made, that they are very groundbreaking visually. And they tell a story through making our attention, and film also has something that you have in an internalized form in the novel, you have in an externalized form in the cinema, whereas that you can basically, if you go into these pioneers like Eisenstein and others, that they found out that you could, for example, take my expression like this, right? And then we cut to the same expression, and I cut to a child that is laying in his crib, very, very gentle, and all of a sudden you read in compassion, and you read in a story into it, like I'm the father, and so on, right? Then you cut back to me, and you use the same expression, and now we cut to that this baby in the crib is all of a sudden laying on the railway, and a train is coming. And now all of a sudden, without me changing the expression, you all of a sudden see this, is this man gonna save this kid? Who is this? All of a sudden you get a different story. So you had a new dialectic and a new form of language, which is the language of cinema. as we know it today. And actually a lot of conventions was laid back then, the groundwork of it. But now back to my point here. Then came sound, and all of a sudden, camera, which was very very free in the beginning of cinema, became all of a sudden blimped, because to record sound they had to put them in these big boxes. You started to kind of cover every scene with a reverse shot, and it become the classics, like this type of pictures, people talking to each other, scripts resembling theater, yada yada yada, you know. So all of a sudden, the free form expression of the language of cinema that was rooted in a visual storytelling, all of a sudden became very, how to say, limited, and kind of back to the theatricality of it. And the story, the plot, all of a sudden became written, you know, since you disabandoned the visual storytelling, right? To me, a great story is like music. I mean, even with the greatest music that I love, it has a certain kind of story, but unspoken kind of story. And I think the first, let's say now, because this is kind of like the groundwork of all kind of storytelling, it starts with an idea. The most common question, what people ask me, for example, if I talk about my films, I'm out showing my films or talking about my books, is where does your ideas come from? And what people are really asking is, what are you able to channel or access that I can't access? I think this is the underlying question, because there is like, to this there is no answer, because I mean, ideas can come from anywhere. But let's say now you have your idea, the seed of your idea. Then I think what most people try to do is to put this idea into the form of now what I spoke about, the cinema after sound was introduced. So you kind of immediately put it into a generic form before the actual idea is thoroughly explored. And later on in coming shows, I will talk to you more about how I'm working more on a principle level of take it scene by scene. You know, you work scene by scene. You work somehow in real time with your story. So we take it step by step. And another thing I also see that I want to change with you is that when you have this idea, this your kind of core idea that I call it, this you must be very protective of, because as you work with film or story, also with the dialogue with yourself and your inner critic, the most common thing to do is to kill something beautiful before. It's kind of like, I see it like you take a seed and you say that it will be a ugly apple tree before it even has had the time to come up as a little sprout, right? So this tiny little seed and this following sprout that will come when you start developing your story, this is your core. And at many points you can find yourself later in the process that this little core saying like, oh yeah, I wanted to tell, you know, you have this vision of that maybe doesn't even make sense. A man standing in a deserted highway with his teddy bear, and bleeding from the stomach, and all of a sudden he bursts out into laughter before he falls down on his knees and dies with a smile, right? So then many people will work their way around this, let's say, picture, saying like, all right, this maybe actually has some good things in it. Naturally has this kind of quality, like how did this man come to this point? Why is he standing there? Why is he laughing in his last moment where he apparently seems to be wounded? What is the story that brought him here, right? That is one way of working with your idea. Then another thing that I see many times is that maybe this initial idea is your metaphor. I mean, for example, Paul Schrader, the writer of Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and many, many other accomplished, great, fantastic cinematic stories. He talks a lot about the metaphor. And I totally agree with Schrader of finding the metaphor, but maybe this living little scene that somehow in the end will not even maybe it will not even end up in your final script or your story. This for me is like your subconsciousness download of a compressed and vast amount of information. It can be almost like let's say it's like your little Pandora's your little black box, and to nourish that initial idea, that is your first and foremost mission, because from that something else will take place. And in next episode we will talk about the development of the story. So that is all from me now. And remember this also, because later on, even let's say that everything happens the right way, you have this initial idea, you go out and write, and then when it all comes back to the same thing, same questions, but in different phases, like people are asking, and what is this film about, or why is this thing important? And it doesn't need to be, the answer to life's questions, but it must somehow be cared about and nourished, because people, unfortunately, in the film business, which we will also talk about, will try to rip this dear little treasure of yours apart. And I see so many people, and the one who is going to try to rip it apart the most is yourself. So try to be protective of these unconscious messages you get from yourself, because they generally can contain the story. And then also many people are not finishing that script and this and that, because they don't stay true to this initial idea that is picture-based or vision-based. I mean, I don't get an idea of like a whole screenplay, a whole film, word by word, but I get it from like I see this scene in front of me, right? You see this happening, this event, within, let's say, the Stanislavski system. They talk about the initial event, and then the driving event, or the event that is carrying the whole story or carrying the characters, and then comes different events. And I think this is a very good thing to think about, that you keep this little seed of yours is worth everything. It might not even be an accomplished idea as such, but this is what you hold on to in the first place. And then we're going to see how to make that blossom. All right. Thank you for tonight. And feel welcome to contact me if you want help with your scripts and or your stories, your novels, whatever. I'm an accomplished reader, and most of all, I like to delve into the story through the point of view of the person who has made it. I'm not for free, but I am listening. And you don't find many of those guys out there with the experience and the love for story making and storytelling that I have. All right. Subscribe and whatever.